ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Welcome back. Christian, how's it going?
Good, just protecting the Hanun with inaccessible jazz.
That's right. That's right. So, guys, today we are going to be talking about a very emotionally charged topic. Possibly the most emotionally charged topic that's ever hit politics, and that is slavery and reparations.
Yeah.
So I just want to give you the disclaimer ahead of time. Neither Christian and I, neither of us are racist in any capacity, right? We don't have any racist bones in our body. And so when we talk about this, understand that it's coming from a completely neutral place, a place of love, right? And when I bring up facts and statistics, it's just me trying to educate. It's not me trying to push somebody in a certain direction, but
we unequivocally state that slavery was wrong, but that doesn't mean when it comes to what the government should do about that today,
right?
We can have opinions on that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are defending, excusing, or advocating in any way for slavery or right.
100%. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, so right, and I mean it bears mentioning, of course, that yes, slavery was just an absolutely horrible institution, right? That led to some absolutely abysmal conditions for a lot of people, right? I mean, even especially the Atlantic slave trade in particular, like bringing people over in crates and stacking them up and stuff like that. That's a very, very painful, very, very. Yeah, go ahead. What did you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, right? So, slavery has been around, right?
Yeah,
America did not invent slavery. That's essentially. I want to say, slavery has been around for a long time, right? And it was really sort of it was sound as a more favorable option to just killing your enemies after a war. Was either they became slaves or unwanted children that were discarded. They were were going to die. You had the option to, if you took them on and raised them and fed them and everything like that, then you could have a slave. So these weren't, I'm not excusing these positions, but they were better than the alternative of sort of death.
I don't know. Maybe.
But it was a rather revolutionary idea of St. Basil in like the 3rd or 4th century, just hope that one day, Christians of the world would be able to turn against slavery. And other Christians, St. Gregory said, oh yeah, that'd be great. I'd love it. But I just don't see that ever happen.
Right.
And really, right, what people are really up in arms about is that when we had more developed capitalism, right, in America and in the West, that we still had slavery, right? Mm-hmm. Though it was it was Christian, the Western Christian nations, Great Britain, and followed by the U.S. and others were the first nations to ban slavery.
Right.
And basically was seen as just a foregone conclusion. If you're wealthy enough or were in a position or something, you were going to find people that were so disadvantaged that they were willing to be slaves. The slavery was just going to exist. And it wasn't right till Britain voluntarily outlawed it. And then the U.S. fought a war, right, to end it. Right. The idea of that slavery is incompatible with our Western culture, our Western ideals, our now Christian and Western melding ideals. And that was a very revolutionary idea. Now, when we look upon it 170 years later, we have all of that knowledge and learning as well. And so we're judging it by our times, not by their times. So not to say that anyway slavery is needed or rationalized today, but people who grew up with it had an understanding with it that we'll never be able to sort of appreciate in their time.
Right. So I was going to get into the history of it, of course. Yeah, one of the biggest myths that you'll hear about it, especially with slavery in American, the American capacity in particular, is that like it's kind of like assumed that kind of like Americans invented it or something like that. It's like the typical accusation is that like white people sort of created slavery, right? And it's nothing could be further from the truth. It was going on in the medieval period out throughout Europe. It's going on when the Greek Empire was going on. It was going on in the Egyptian Empire. Literally as old as we have records for, slavery has existed, and long before that. Like literally, it was probably the very first commodity ever traded, right? Probably before any other like tools or jewelry or anything or baskets, there was first humans, right? And so, of course,
labor, yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah, human labor was probably the very first thing that was ever traded, and should never have been, but of course it is. But yeah, so that's the first thing to know is right. Like Christian said, it was
we're enlightened. Yeah,
it was everywhere, and it literally until the West conquered slavery, it was in every single civilization ever to exist. The only exception to that would be like really like secluded, isolated places where they're like itty bitty communities that don't have any like, trade or like need for mass labor. Like if you didn't have like a farming community, that's the only time where you wouldn't see.
Still, even like the Tongans took the Samoans, made Samoans their slaves in their wars and the Polynesian wars. Like,
oh yeah,
it was still a thing. Like, it's hard for us to understand it now, but it was something that was understood then that's now. But yes,
right.
So the United States government, right, the Great Compromise, right, our ideals, all men were created equal, but in a compromise to keep the Union together with the Constitution, allowed slavery to remain legal, right? And the 3/5 compromise to count slaves as 3/5 of the person, things that we look down upon now. But ultimately, right, with the Civil War came the end of slavery, and importantly, right, the 14th Amendment that guaranteed equal protection before the law for everyone, regardless of their other thing. And I think that's really where nowadays, right, and ever since that, immediately after the Civil War, the U.S. government and our culture tried to make reparations, tried to repair things for the slaves and their descendants. Tried to reconstruction probably didn't go on long enough, which was probably why they say a lot of the problems that we see today, right? There was a plan to give freed slaves 40 acres and a mule so that they could provide for themselves, right? And that plan was not seen through to its end, as so many government plans are not. And so people are seeing the reparations now, they want cash reparations. Well, really, since then, they've been trying in different capacities, even free states that never had slaves, are trying to help their populations that have been affected by the institution of slavery, even by the end of slavery. And so now, in our day, what have hit the news recently is that 2 states that never owned slaves have decided to go very far left on the issue of reparations. California, which never had slaves, and Illinois, right? So Illinois, the birthplace of the Republican Party, and Abraham Lincoln, right? They ideologically never had slaves. California was the reason why the Civil War started, because when we discovered gold in California, California had to be made a state, and there wasn't another state to bring in. And California insisted that they come in not as a slave state, but as a free state where slavery was allowed. That was a condition of them becoming a state. And with California coming in as a free state, that tipped the balance, and that they knew that now that they could enact laws and legally start restricting and drawing down the end of slavery, thus the Civil War. So these states have historically really good records for being on the right side of history when it comes to the issue of slavery. But in 2025, they are heavily dominated by Democratic politics. Democrat voters, they have super majorities, especially California. And and so both of their governors have aspirations for to raise their profile nationally. And Newsom, who's been the governor of California for 8 years now, has there at various points different black caucuses or different groups have brought up making reparations, and he's always voted it down, any type of legal thing, right? And I'll talk about 2 instances where reparations have happened, where cases have happened. but that it's a statewide or certainly a blanket wide. Everybody that identifies as Black gets a certain amount of money. He has disavowed, right? Because the Black Caucus wants reparations that anyone, who identifies as a Black American can prove they're a descendant of slaves.
Well, sure, I
and
can start identifying.
and lives below the poverty line, doesn't have intense wealth, can get cash settlement from 2 states that never supported, right? Never had legalized slavery in their midst, and were definitely part of the institutional opposition and the war to end it.
Right.
So this seems what this nakedly feels like is a way to appease 2 white governors, to appease to a Black base that's very important in any type of presidential primary, and a way of funneling money from the government to their voter base.
Of course.
So that's the most cynical view of it.
It's the truth, though. And
right, what would you say?
Well, yeah, and to be honest with you, even if it's funny because you can have these conversations with like I've had some of these conversations with friends of mine, and they'll say, like in private, they'll say, yeah, no, that's ridiculous, right? Logistically alone, it's just infeasible. But if somebody's gonna be like, here's some money, they're not gonna say no, right? They're not gonna be like, oh no, you keep it. This wouldn't be right. There's no way in a million years that's gonna happen. So I mean, of course, if they can help their political allies out, that's the game, right? But I mean, yeah, reparations. Well, before we even get into reparations, right? There's a couple of things that I want to address about like myths about slavery that people just don't realize, right? So one is that people will say things like, Britain wasn't the first group to abolish slavery, and like that's a technicality that's technically true, right? If you want to know, ironically, who the first political entity to abolish slavery, to like choose to elect to do it, it was actually Vermont, right? So like actually, the United States has another first under their belt, right? And even though they would say like the counter arguments against Britain and France being the first abolitionists, they'll pitch out names like Haiti and Mexico and Chile, but the thing is, those were all European led at the time also, right? So like it really didn't change anything, right? People will like point to Haiti, although Haiti didn't even elect to do it. There was a slave revolt, and that's how they ended up being a free state. But yeah, like so really it was 100% the West that ended slavery, like across the board. The only group that was even remotely not the West that had anything to do with it, like places like Tunisia, right, which still largely did it due to Western pressure, primarily Britain's pressure.
Well, Tunisia was taking Americans and white people, Europeans, as slaves to work on their ships, right? And we had to fight. We had to fight the war. Jefferson had to send the ships to Tripoli. So there was definitely slavery of not just enslaved Africans. And what we imagine, right? I think a lot of our imagination or the our concept of slavery is shaped, unfortunately, by film and TV images, which is which is a sensationalized and entertainment sort of version of the American South, of large plantations of huge, one wealthy, lazy person sitting there and benefiting off of labor. Slavery was, much different than that. I read a book called The Hidden Wound about what was very typical about a Kentucky family, right, who owned one slave, right? They lived in an 800 square foot shack. They all slept in there. The whole family, as well as the slave. He ate all the same food. When they went out, they worked in the field. They all did the same labor in the field, right? He had his whole thing. And when he became unhappy with them, they thought of him, as just Jim. Like none of them were getting money or any or profit. They were just trying to survive. It was subsistence, and he was eating and subsisting as well as all of them. He became unhappy with the situation, and so they sold him. Right. And they talked about the story that came through that was passed down. It was like a wound that wounded this white family, was how the violence of the system became apparent to them when that slave trader came to take him away, right? But they really didn't think of themselves as slavers because, you know, it wasn't like they were living in this big mansion and he was living in squalor. They were all living the same thing. They were doing the same stuff. But that they had a right to just sell this person off, and he had to go wherever this person was, like confronted with the slavery, right? And so, you know, that inherent lack of freedom, and that even like even if it wasn't, you know, sort of exploitative or the big mansions like we see in there, still was something that was very damaging to our culture, right? And to people that we're still trying to recover from.
Of course.
But we made great efforts at it. There's efforts. Well, and one of the things, right, the failure of the 40 acres and the mule, or the failure of Reconstruction, we can, that was 160 years ago, 170 years ago.
Right.
To say that now taxpayers or the government are responsible for that is a very thin, very thin thread.
So yeah, one of the other things to mention, right? Another thing that people don't even realize, an interesting fact about slavery, is that about 1% of all free households were slave owners. Like roughly one, I think at the peak of it, like right before the Civil War, it was like 1.2% of all free white households were slavers. And by the way, at the peak of it, roughly 1% of all free black households were slavers also. And so people don't now obviously it's still, there were lots more white people, and of the white people, more of them were free. And so like the number of free black people in total was much smaller, right? So the number of free black slave owners was much smaller as well, but percentages, they were roughly equivalent, right? So like it was just, if you were lucky and you were rich, congratulations. You if you were a landowner, congratulations. But that was very rare, even among white people. It was very rare, right? So like part of the reparations argument is like, you know, that the whole culture has to pay, and we're paying for 1% of the culture's sins, right? It's like a very small percentage. And right,
and the thing is, we've had programs for years, and to pay to give money, benefits specifically funneled to descendants of slaves, and the most direct of that, I guess, we would say, would be Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty and the Great Society, and the civil rights things that he enacted, the welfare state that he created, specifically to provide a type of reparations. Now, I want to talk about this debate became more avant-garde or more favorable in when California became a supermajority. But there was a case of a family, and this was an egregious abuse of power by the government. And this is a case of reparations that I fully support. So in the 30s, there was a beach called Bruce's Beach. It was in what would be present-day Manhattan Beach, which is a very bougie, nice part of Los Angeles, Santa Monica Bay, where a black family purchased land and created, at their own sort of bootstraps and investment, created a resort there for blacks to go to the beach. Since they were banned, all the other beaches where blacks were banned, they could come to this beach. Well, there were, for reasons that were nakedly racist, the opposition, the city claimed eminent domain and took over their land, right, and closed the beach, right? Then they proceeded for the next 100 years to do nothing with that land.
Right.
They didn't put a school on it. They didn't put a power station on it. They didn't put a fire station on it. They did nothing, right? And so normally eminent domain, which is a power, a very scary power we grant to the government to take property, and we expect them to use it extremely judiciously. And so an abuse of that power, I think, should absolutely, we should be holding the government accountable for. So Manhattan Beach and stuff went back, and they found that the owners had passed away, but their children were still alive, and they deeded them back this land, right, which is now worth millions and millions of dollars. And as a way of sort of, look, what we did before was indefensible. It was all justified. You could go through it in court, right, make the case. There was all the documents were there. Here's the land back. Then those descendants have chosen to sell the land back to the city for $20 million, or essentially. But it was, they could have created a resort. They could have done anything they wanted to with it. They've chosen to sell back and take the cash.
Whoa.
So in that case, I definitely feel like going after, if the government does something where they deny people's rights, where they're blatantly in the wrong, they're using anti-religious, anti-racial things to seize people's property. They're restoring that property now, especially if there are records and that property, or the land, especially real estate, it still exists, can be given to those descendants. And you can make those cases. But when it's private individuals who died 170 years ago, and there's no, and who know, and you're private individuals who happen to identify nowadays, you can't, in a case-by-case basis, I don't think very well, make out a case in court to that a private individual, a descendant of somebody who owned slaves 170 years ago, needs to have their wages garnished or pay a portion of their wealth to somebody who's a descendant now. Right. So that's a thread that's unprecedented. And so, and they know, and so I'm all for due process. If you have a claim of reparations, bring it to court, right? Make it, and then have it, see if it's a valid claim. But what they want is blanket reparations, where it's just if you identify as this, then you're eligible for a cash payment. And now both California and Illinois are both hugely underwater in debt. In debt. Illinois for the public pensions, and they are begging to try to get the federal government to bail them out on that. Right. So they can bail them out, and then they can use their money to do these reparations for political reasons. Right. So it's very skeptical that they're saying that the state's going to make these payments, but this is going to come from payments that they're going to try to take from the federal government. And we should be very skeptical that using something that sounds like, hey, we're trying to repair for something that everybody agrees is wrong. Everybody agrees slavery is wrong. So let's repair that, but they're doing it for political purposes. I think we're right to be skeptical and say, whoa. Bring your case on an individual basis and see if that can be justified. And if the case where it will be strongest is if the government denied your rights, not if a private individual who died 170 years ago.
That's the only case that would be warranted, right? So this is since we're, you kind of jumped the gun again, I guess, a little bit to go straight to reparations. But so since we're on reparations now, the legal precedent, right? The typical legal situation for someone that wants to get money back from something, right? For any kind of recompense, any kind of compensation, the legal case is there has to be a direct a sense of injury or loss that can be proven, like a definable injury or loss. It has to be from a direct cause, and it also has to be something that the court can still remedy, right? So, like, if you lost a girlfriend 30 years ago and that person no longer exists, obviously the court can't give that person back to you, like stuff like that. Like it has to be something the court can still give you now because it still exists and there's still a way to make things right. So, I mean, I think reparations fails on all three accounts, right? Because number one, there's no definable loss that can be pointed to, unfortunately. Now,
it's an unknowable question, right? How much they would, how better their lives would have been. Right.
Exactly right. Like in the moment, right? Sure. Obviously, that, like, if you could go back 170 years and somebody goes like, "Hey, look, I worked all of my life. I think my labor's worth X or whatever." Then yeah, you could document a definable amount that's missing. But one of the myths that surrounds this thing is the concept of generational wealth, And this is something that the left has a problem with all over the place.
Oh yeah,
they use it as their chief argument in critical race theory, right? Is that because these things carry from generation to generation. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you that history has a long tail, and these waves, they're going to ripple throughout eternity. But generational wealth is not really a thing. So just to give you some stats on this, of millionaires, only 21% of millionaires give anything at all to their inheritance to the next generation down. Only 21% give even a penny. And only 3% give an actual $1 million or more down to the next level, right? Now, if you compound that over like it's actually been about 8 generations since slavery, but let's be generous and say 5. That means the chances mathematically that you would have received any money from your forefathers that were slaves had they not been slaves, the chances that you'd get any money from that, even if they were millionaires, is 0.04%. Almost nothing. Like almost impossible. Like the chances that you get any money from that is it just doesn't happen, right? You get money from your own income mobility, from your own education, from your own hard work, from your own on and on and on. And there's so many things that affect it more than whether or not your great grandfather was a slave. So many more things, right?
Yeah.
So that's,
I mean, yeah.
the biggest
If
one.
if I could say that my great grandfather Albert Miner, he was the one who immigrated from, he was a coal miner in England, right? These are
Right.
Not a wealthy guy, right? The lowest of the low in Durham, England, on the social class and the economic class, and emigrated to Ohio,
Right.
and then to Missouri, and then to Illinois. First in 1833, he came to Ohio, and in Missouri and in Illinois, he owned property that was taken from him because the state disagreed with his religious conviction, would not offer him protections. He was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There was an extermination order, and he was exiled and lost all of his property in Missouri. Goes to the church, founded a town in Illinois called Nauvoo. And you did a little research on this.
Yes.
At the time, at its height, it was bigger than Chicago, right? Port city, excuse me, on the Mississippi River.
Right.
My direct ancestor, Albert Miner, owned land there. And then the church was denied their right to practice, right? Joseph Smith was killed. And then ultimately the church was forced with greater violence, with no protection from the state government for it. And ultimately immigrated, had to leave the country, had to go to Mexico, which was what Utah was at the time, in 1847.
Mm-hmm.
Now the church, the main body of the church left with Brigham Young and set up a base in Nebraska called winter quarters to make it through that winter.
Right.
Albert Miner did not leave with that first group because he had pneumonia and he was still trying to sell his property, right? But in the middle of winter, the people came, the official, like judges, the state, representing the state, and said he had to leave now. He couldn't sell his property, and forced him to leave, forced him to cross the Mississippi, and he died in Iowa, Council Bluffs, Iowa, within a month, right? Before he could even make it to the winter quarters area, right? So if Illinois is serious about reparations,
right,
would they say, hey, here's an instance where the state denied constitutional rights to individual, lost property that could have become very valuable, but is still there, and caused him to lose his life because of it. What type of reparations are they willing to pay to the descendants of Albert Miner, of who I'm a direct descendant? My mother was a miner.
Right.
And if they're willing to take my claim seriously, I would be surprised because it seems like that they only want to do this based on identity, and my identity doesn't come across as somebody. I'm not a wealthy man. I didn't inherit wealth, things like that. But my identity identifies myself as not a victim, and generally as conservatives, we try to live our life saying we're not victims.
Right.
And so it hasn't been a lifelong cause celebrated for me to make this reparations claim. But since they brought it up that they want to pay reparations, they're very interested in it. I'm like, well, if you agree, I agree.
Right. Again, right. Yeah, no one's going to turn down money. If speaking of, if you guys want to throw us some super chats, we'll always take the seriously. Like while you're here, definitely hit like, share, subscribe, do all the things that are free and stuff that'll help us out. But yeah. I mean, if anyone has a right to a reparation, it sounds like you have at least a better case than most. I mean, the precedents in history for reparations of some sort in America are like the Japanese internment reparations and the Native American like trust fund mismanagement reparations and stuff like that. So in both of those cases, they share a similarity to yours in that, number one, the government is directly the cause of, and number two, there's at least some form of documentation of like a material loss, right? Like you have land that was, you could at least survey it and say, look, this is the plot, And so I think you would succeed in theory, although, you'd have to get a lawyer and work that whole process.
Yeah. I wouldn't qualify just because I'm a member of the church.
Right.
And we did, and the church was treated poorly by the state. My membership in the church does not qualify for that. I have to make a case in court with all the facts of my direct descendants and have a judge decide whether that's material or not and repairable or not. Right. But just saying that I'm a member of a group that got treated poorly or denied civil rights does not qualify me for anything.
The Mormons, I mean, the Church of Latter-day Saints did get treated poorly in various other places too, for various other circumstances. So if they're going to do this whole blanket, like anybody who's a member of X group that was treated badly at some point, then you probably still have a bigger claim than most. And that's part of the problem with that is like, what about people that just became Church of Latter-day Saints like last week, right? Yeah. What about African Americans who immigrated from Ethiopia like 4 years ago, and by the way, are filthy rich, right? Like this is part of the problem. The two big problems with the logistics, obviously, of reparations are one, who gets it, and two, who pays, right? And you can lump in each group, there are so many problems with the thought of reparations, so many problems with the concept of the logistics that, like, for example, what if you're an African American who's descended from slaves who married a white person who's descended from slave owners? Does your family get paid? Do you pay yourself? I mean,
she has to put money in his bank account, in their shared bank account.
These are kind of the craziness that shows up.
Well, and here's the thing too, why we feel it's un-American. The church has never sued, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has never sued the government for these things, even though we feel like the grave injustices, because we want our members that live in Illinois and Missouri and these other places to live in peace. We don't want to rip the scabs off of old wounds, right? We want to move on. We want to live in peace. We don't want to define our things by that people made mistakes and denied us rights in the past. We're glad, we say now we're guaranteed equal protection. We feel like if we go to court, that our case will be heard and our rights will be respected. Hooray! That's a win for us. We're not trying to continually dredge up the time that our rights were denied us. Right. And I think that's what feels un-American about this is like you go back into time far enough, everybody's going to find a time where a past ancestor was dealt with. But what happens if they start going through your ancestry and find something disqualifying, like, oh, well, this person committed felonies, so now you're out.
Right.
Now you don't qualify anymore, or whatever. Like, it's got to be damage to you. It's got to be too recent. And I think when it's over 100 years, there's no principles there anymore. I think that string gets really threadbare. Now today or just yesterday, Newsom, who'd been vetoing a lot of this reparation stuff, it's part of his move to the center. He wants to be seen as a more centrist Democrat, right? Well, he finally signed a law to create a state commission in California to examine reparations. Now, right, the recommendations, because it was proposed by the Black Caucus, is they wanted, the most liberal is just, based on identity, people that identify as descendants of slaves.
Right.
And can make, the records are not great, but can make a decent claim that they were a descendant of, an enslaved person. Now, here's the thing. What if it's legitimate or it's illegitimate, right? The state only have to consider legitimate, right? They were married. Every chain was married. Illegitimate children, right? Break that chain, right?
Interesting.
Right? It's going to be a big thing for that. Like, so that's why if you don't have, right, with the dissolution of the Black family, their claims become much, much, much weaker. When there's so much fewer marriages and so much fewer legitimacy, something that you would have had from that now all of a sudden fades into the wind. But they're going to try to push it because they want to be seen. I think it's a pandering action. And maybe Newsom knows this. Maybe he's done some research and knows that it goes nowhere. So him signing a law allowing a commission to explore reparations is a way for him to say, like, there's legitimately nothing we can do right now legally because any legal case would fall apart.
Knowing Newsom, though, I don't know that. I mean, he's pretty left. I mean, he's pretty progressive. Part of the problem, though, right, is like you said, there's just way too many complications. I believe, though, that you hit the nail right on the head, though, when you said that this is about getting funding from the federal government, because I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's like, even if the commission turns up like, yeah, we really can't track this very well. I wouldn't be surprised if he still says, hey, but yeah, we can track some of it. Give me money. Like it would not surprise me in the least. And I mean, I've got a personal situation. I'm wondering, give me your opinion on this, because I don't know that it would qualify for reparations, but I'm wondering if it would qualify for payment of reparations, right? Because part of the game here is that people say oh, we've endured all this hardship from slavery. Well, America, more than most, has gone through considerable lengths to try to pay that back. And we've done it in blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, we 300,000 Union soldiers, immense amounts of treasure. Our entire Southern economy was decimated from the Civil War. Like opportunity lost, cost out the Union. But here's one of my personal sort of stories, right? So, for those of you guys who don't know, I was in Southern High School, was looking at colleges, and had decided upon NC State. I had gotten into a lot of colleges, even waitlisted in MIT, but NC State was like my dream, right? It was computer engineering, exactly the degree I wanted. They had a very prestigious computer engineering degree, right? Now, the scholarship opportunity for NC State was called the Parks Scholarship. It was a full ride. It was a sweet deal. And I was in the running for the Parks Scholarship. And for each high school, you would get 2 recommendations, right? So I applied, and I had, let me tell you, I was a walking resume. I mean, I graduated 7th in my class. I had a 4.3 something GPA. I was active in the community. I did lots of community service. I was active in my church. I was captain of 3 varsity sports teams. I was like in National Honor Society, Mu Alpha Theta, on and on and on. And like, I was literally just a walking scholarship resume, right? And my SAT scores were like over 14. It was insane, right? Like, I was best you could possibly. Now, the guys that I was competing with, one girl was equivalent to me, had a very, very capable resume, right? But everybody else, it should have been me and her, like, by a mile. Nobody else was even remotely close to the kind of like resume that we had. But instead of me getting it, they gave it to a friend of mine who, graduated like 30th in his class and was a member of one sports team, not a captain, and was not, like just like basically every section of resume quality that I
Inferior,
had.
yeah, a
He was
downgrade, yeah.
like, and so, so at this point I'm thinking, okay, maybe there was an interview. Maybe he just like went into the interview and blew him out of the water. Like maybe he just gave this outrageous interview. So I went up to congratulate him. I'm like, man, you must have done an insane interview. Fantastic job. Like, congratulations. He's like, yeah, I don't know why they gave it to me. I told them in the interview I had already accepted a position at Georgia Tech. So at that point, I'm like, excuse me? So literally, they gave it to this guy just so they could say, hey, look, we put a woman and a black person as our recommendations and no other reason. So I lost out on a full ride just so that this guy could get a recommendation. And so then the last thing
for virtue signaling, even though he wanted to go somewhere else. Yeah.
And so the last thing I checked just to make sure, I had just covered all the bases. I'm like, all right, well, maybe there's a thing where, like, if they send somebody that doesn't go, they get their money back or something like that. No, it just slides down to the next position. So I was like, this is outrageous. So they literally just tanked my career, my life, my scholarship. Now, of course, fortunately, I ended up with, military scholarship anyway.
Yeah.
But I hadn't decided to be in the military at that point. I thought I was trying to be. And so my question is this, that scholarship's worth about 30 grand over 4 years, right? So can I consider myself to have already paid $30,000 of reparations? Right? Can I that's my question. Like, the amount of money that we've put into like affirmative action and like welfare toward the African American community and like on and on and on. We've paid a ton in America. We've put blood, sweat, and tears into it. Why is it that reparations aren't considered to have already been paid?
All right. Here's really the thing is that in our culture, reparations are slimy because we understand that there's going to be unfairness. The justice is supposed to be blind. The government's not supposed to treat people differently, right? But we understand that there is going to be unfairness. There's going to be things like that, and we try to help people overcome, right, when they get an obstacle like that, and help them find, okay, you didn't get this preferred path, but let's try to find you another path forward so you can move forward with like i.e. military or other things like that. Because suing, and that's what you would do. You would sue, taking everything to a legal thing and to a judge can maybe feel very personally validating that have a judge say, yes, you were officially treated, incorrectly. Everything that was done to you was done incorrectly, and there should be a warning to not do this again. But suing like that, we try to say it should be reserved for the most extreme things. Now, if you were doing it to help people down the line, other people that you thought might be damaged by somebody doing something similar, I can see that. But generally, like in our Christian thing, is suing just for our own benefit. It's probably why you didn't do it.
Right.
You're like, okay, well, that sucks. I mean, it's outrageous, but I'll find another way forward. But if you were feeling like, well, I know other people are going to have this same counselor who's going to every time, deny their resumes, then I need to press the issue for their sake.
Right.
People will do that, but generally, there was a student who applied for the University of Texas and overwhelmingly qualified, but was denied for reasons that were highly questionable. So she sued, had to work her way up through the courts, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they basically agreed with her. But by that point, like, she wasn't able to benefit from it. Like, she'd moved on, gotten a degree from somebody else. But it was important to, the changes had to be made. That type of blanket injustice couldn't come officially, or wouldn't be tolerated officially. So I can see that, and I feel like that's a lot of the validation that Blacks want is. I mean, we've apologized for slavery. We've tried to fund programs to educate and to give opportunities and training things to and we have a rising class of African American millionaires, right? And this is like the first group of people, right? And they're billionaires who are African American. It's not just right the only wealthy people are white people. There are minorities and a lot of black people who are millionaires who would like to pass this money on to their descendants. And so the idea of passing wealth on to their children, legitimate children, is definitely something that before was seen as, a 100% slam dunk for the Democratic Party. But now, as right. So we still say when it is stereotyping of the worst kind to just think that all black people are marginalized, right? And cannot overcome these obstacles, cannot become wealthy, cannot become successful in America, just because there are larger urban slums.
Well, so yeah, I mean,
but that's not the case. Millions of these succeed, rise up, make good choices, and overcome.
Right. Yeah. So one of the questions to ask is like everybody in their ancestral history has some stuff, right? Like something that happened to their family, something that went wrong. Like if you're in the ancient world, the scholars estimate that literally a third of all of the world was a slave. So like the chances that you don't have slavery in your ancestral history are very small, actually.
Well, yeah, and peasants are a different name, but they were basically
serfs.
You think my minor ancestors were living in castles and and being Lord Minor? No.
No, yeah, right. And so and even now, the question is, right. So like if you were to, it seems easy to break it down into like, oh, black people here, white people here, who's doing better financially, right? And white people have an edge overall. But if you were to break those groups down a little bit more than that, like if you were to break down like black people who have been in America for 200 years, or black people who immigrated from Kenya, right? Or black people who like the ones that immigrate from Africa, Nigeria and Ethiopia, they do very well, very, very well, compared, like far better than many of the groups from the white group, like far better than most like white or rural, redneckish like subgroups or whatever. But that doesn't mean, again, it's like you're never going to have people that are just like in perfect parity. And that kind of like thinking, that kind of like the thought that everyone will end up with the same result if we just do X or Y or Z, this is the left-wing problem fundamentally, right?
Well,
never have.
Yeah, and the fantasy, if the government would just give me $6 million, my life would be better. Look, it would be. I would love the government gave me $6 million, right? Right. So everybody's on that. So it's sort of a position that everybody's going to agree with, but it's built on sand. What were you going to say? Was that a question you want to answer?
Yeah, well, I want to address Groovin's been very active, so I'm gonna reward him with a although super. By the way, if you guys want to get our attention, super chats are the best way to do it. So Groovin says yes, give reparations in the form of a generous welfare state to all living Americans going forward. Use a fair and progressive tax scheme. Well, one of the interesting things about the American tax scheme is it's already essentially the most progressive tax scheme in the world. But interestingly, you put those two words together, fair and progressive. And ironically, I would say that those two words just don't belong together, because the progressive tax scheme, by definition, is like this tiered scheme where it's not fair, where some people are taxed more than others, right? And usually by wealth, right? Usually it's because they make a certain minimum amount, but that's not fair, right? If you were to play a game of Monopoly, right, and then one person, when they go around the board, they get $800 for pass and go, and the other people get 400 and 300 and 200, and you tier it. That's just not fair, right? Like the fair thing is that everybody plays by the same rules. That's fair, and you know, I get Grooven that you want to like kind of fix wrongs, right wrongs. That's again, I think that's just the left leaning fallacy. You just can't solve all the problems in the world. Some of them have to solve themselves.
Yeah, I think right. They say the simplest tax is a poll tax, right, or something you pay. Everybody pays when you do a census. Everybody pays the no, well, not even flat rate, just the same amount. Say everybody pays $100, right? That's the simplest one.
Right.
But that's unfair, right? So, but a flat rate tax where everyone has a rate of how much money do you earn? You earn you earn $1 million. You earn $1,000. Everybody pays a flat rate. That would be the most fair. But we've even gone beyond that and said like, all right, if you make less than a certain amount, it's like $30,000. We won't take any of your money, right? It's only the people, right? We won't even start taking even small percentage of it unless you're doing very well, right? And then even more. So we have that now, and it's what progressives though. It's never enough for progressives. Right, they long for like the 90% tax rates and things like that, which were hugely disincentivizing to progress,
100%.
and that's why we had to get them. So we have good progressive things there. The problem is we have entitlements right now that are already so expensive. We have no extra money to go around. The current entitlements have to do their job of redistributing wealth. And here's the big thing: the Democrats don't trust it unless they're the ones doing the redistribution.
Of course,
because they want the money to go to their voters, to their NGOs, to their interest groups, to promote their worldview, and they don't want it to go out fairly. Because here's a instance in the LA Fire Department, LA County Fire Department, Long Beach Fire Department. These highly sought after positions, right? So they pay, the pay was good, right? The benefits were good. You'd work 10 days a month, right? I mean, they're 24-hour days, but you'd work 10 days a month. So lots of people would try, but you can pick up overtime at other places and you can do very well. So people would apply for these jobs. Lots of people would apply. And what they would do is they'd go to the top of the list, the most qualified, right after taking these tests, which were written, as well as physical tests, like a time carrying hoses up this 10-story sort of building, staircases and stuff like that. And they'd go down, all right, who did the best? And they'd start hiring, right? A friend of mine, he got hired because he was number 25 out of 4,000 people to take this test, so he got a job. Well, they found that this was not hiring enough minorities. So one of the things they said is you'll get bonus points if you speak Spanish, right? We were written test in Spanish. Well, white guys have taken Spanish classes. Lots of white guys speak Spanish. And so they were passing that, no problem. And so that wasn't giving them the results they wanted. And so that's why I think when you say, like, look, if you've got a past wrong, then they're trying to speak to their constituency, thinking that this is unbalanced for them.
Right.
Like, hey, if you've been wronged by the government in the past, maybe we can get you some money. There are going to be millions of white people that will have excellent claims, like myself, like others, that can come up and say, whoa, if you're handing out money,
of course,
how about this, right? And so if it's good for the goose, it's got to be good for the gander. And I think that's where, right, when the left, they really, really, really do not want, right? They don't want white refugees from South Africa. They do not want reparations monies going to anybody in any way that's white, right? I have no history in my ancestry of anybody owning slaves. So they can't come after me, but I can come after them, right? But I'm choosing not to. Right. And they should say, like, okay, let's just move on. Everybody should do that.
Here's another question. Another question is, even if we did this, like even if we gave out reparations, let's say like we could wave the magic wand and just create money out of thin air and then start handing it out, right?
We annex Canada and it makes us so wealthy we have tons of money.
Yeah, I mean, but even if we could, would it even help? Because I mean, here's something to think about, right? You know that people that win the lottery, like over 70% of them go broke in 5 years.
bankrupt.
Right? The truth is that just giving away money just doesn't solve problems like people think it does, right? Like they think it sounds good, right? It sounds great. I'd love to
You can
people
go
to
out to
hand me
dinner
money.
a lot more, yeah.
But the truth is, and especially amongst lottery players, for example, like part of the game, part of the sociological game is the type of person that plays the lottery is the type of person that's less capable with managing their money. They're just gambling on losing gambles all the time, right? That's why they play the lottery. The same is true for people that are poor in general. Now, that doesn't mean that all poor people can't manage their money. Of course, there's some that can, but on average, if you can manage your money well, you are less likely to be poor. So if you are going to just start handing out money to those who are marginalized, who are downtrodden, who are poor, they are going to be less likely to know how to manage it. They're going to be more likely to just go broke very, very quickly, or to be taken advantage of about, by predators nearby that see that they just got a windfall of money, or any number of things that can happen. But the point is, I don't even think this would help. And I think history shows us that the more that we've dumped money into welfare, the more we've just created a reliance on it, not like magically like whisked people out of that poverty. Right? Like I think
right. That's what they like to do, is have people be on government assistance for a temporary, period to boost them, not a permanent status of dependence. And I think, yeah, right. So what if okay, reparations, you're a descendant. Here's $100. Thank you for applying. Like, you now have some official
oh yeah, it would be
recognition, of your status, but it's so diluted by 8 generations and illegitimacy
right.
that all you get is $100. I think it's a false hope. I think it's leading people like, oh, all my problems, all my money problems are going to go away because they're going to deliver me reparations, and
Well,
it's
have you
not.
heard
And we shouldn't be thinking that way.
Have you heard some of the commissions like numbers that they're spitting out?
Oh yeah.
They're
Oh,
they're
oh
saying
my
stuff
God.
like $20 trillion and
Yes,
stuff
yes,
like that.
I
And I'm
know.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
excuse me? There
yeah.
wasn't even that
Oh
much
yeah.
wealth in the entire South at that time. Like the entire GDP for like 100 years for the South wouldn't have been even close to that in today's numbers. Like not even
Yeah.
close. And you know what? 20 million. Here's the other problem, right? So
They
let's
think
assume we
that
wanted
we
to do
have
this.
enough money to do this anyway. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's say we wanted to do this, right? And like all the stuff happened. Like we whisked the magic wand and we just like handed out $20 million. There's only two ways to get it. Either we start taxing people a whole bunch more. And by the way, like our current like budget, something like right, is like 5 trillion. So like it would be literally 5 times our budget. So we'd literally be 5 times the taxes at least, if not more, because we're already in debt, right? We're already not making it with the amount of taxes we've got. So maybe 6, 7 times it, or you just print it and then you have 5 times the inflation. So literally the money you hand out is worth 1/5 of its value. Actually, it's less for complicated reasons, but I don't want to get into it all. But you literally have dumped somebody, 15% of the value. That means Black people are paying for their own reparations again because all of the wealth that they have to date will be diminished by inflation. This whole thing makes no sense.
Well, here's one thing. Emancipationists would say that if you can prove you're a descendant of African slave trade, the
Sure.
government should assist you in re-immigration to the African nation of your choice.
That's terrible. I mean, obviously,
Right?
well,
Would they
ironically,
want to do that? How many people would take advantage of that?
oh, thank you so much for all right. So Itano Gary says, kind of complicated to read, but it said number 2 on as JACL's number 2 on JA reparations with NCRR. There's a lot of acronyms that I don't even know. Do you know what he's talking about?
No. Well,
But anyway, it says
North
20.
Carolina Railroad. 20K was only a token presumed sincere.
Any educational support is essential for awareness and to update history.
So a North Carolina Reparations Commission, I guess, is what is asking for 20K as a token presumed sincere.
for each person.
Right. So again, yeah. So reparations in each state. All right. Again, I'm not up on the particular claims and purposes being pushed forward for every state. The ones I researched were California and Illinois, who have been in the news lately. Uh, and have had the governor's support. As far as I know right now, North Carolina's governor has not signed anything come out in support of making reparations. So it hasn't got as real here in North Carolina. If that's what NCRR is, I'll do some research into that.
Yeah,
but right now, California and Illinois are the bleeding edge of this because their governors have signed things that their legislature has passed. And so that's why we're kind of like, whoa, we're more identifying that. If that becomes the case in North Carolina, we will definitely do a follow-up show and research that more. But unfortunately, I agree that if the government was going to give support, it should be to increase the educational or occupational capacities of people. We would love, I think that's one of the things in Durham. Eddie has a brother who graduated from NC Central University, which was a historically black college that the state has poured tons of resources into making it a much better education, and not just it's open to people of all races. It's not just blacks anymore, but to make the programs offer more degrees, offer a level of education that's much more comparable to other state schools throughout the state, and make it's only $500 a semester. There are 4 schools with universities in North Carolina that do this, right? So they're heavily subsidizing it. Your tuition for a year, $500 to get full time, for the school. And there's one in Durham, UNC Pembroke, Western Carolina, and I can never remember the last one. I think it's closer to Charlotte, but
yeah, my father got a Central scholarship too for being
and so the state is trying to do this. They're trying to increase educational opportunities, and I support that to a degree, but that the I feel like identity should be secondary, but that everybody who wants to go to college and work and get a degree should have that opportunity, for reduced costs. And I think they have to pay something, or it won't mean anything to them, have a little skin in the game. So even $500, which is like a token amount for tuition, but it shows that they I think will help them be better students and take it a little more seriously.
My what was I gonna say? So Thomas Sowell, look, guys, I have a book that I want to recommend everybody read. There's a book called what is it called? Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And one of the things that Thomas Sowell details is that the biggest cost of slavery was actually the depletion of culture, right? Because like Africans on the whole had a very, very strong work ethic. And what happened is when they came over here and became slaves, they adopted a lot of the white redneck culture, which, has some detrimental elements to it. So one of the things like that, I think the best way to solve any kind of reparations issue is actually like to try to uplift everyone's culture at the same time, right? Things like community centers, things like apprenticeships and like work studies where people can like, in the area, they can learn a craft, they can learn how to, educate themselves, they can learn how to get educational opportunities and scholarships, they'll have access to bigger networks. And I think that's something that we should do everywhere. That, and of course, making sure that law enforcement keeps a clean community everywhere so that commerce can thrive. I think those are the 2 biggest things that'll.
Absolutely. I've got to go, but I would also recommend there's a book I read if you're interested more in the history of this. It's called White Trash, history of class in America. Very fascinating, but part of the context is that it's the lower class whites and the poor blacks that are in this conflict because they would do the same kind of jobs as slaves and poor whites. And that's still sort of seen as a major conflict today, even though they have the most similarities in culture too. But ultimately, I feel like the government reparations has to be done through due process, right, with really strong claims as determined by a court. But saying that anybody who is part of an identity group is going to qualify for money from the government is bad policy and it's bad politics. And I'd hope that as common men we can see through that and not be taken in.
Right. Well, Christian, thanks for being on. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes just because it's so big. But thanks so much for your insights today, and we'll catch you next time. All right. So
thanks, everyone.
Take it easy. All right. So one thing I wanted to address too was that we have a couple of people who are in the audience who are very, very strong proponents of like this sort of welfare system that will right all wrongs, that we can redistribute all of the wealth and get everybody back onto this magical level playing field. Well, one of the things that I want to mention about that is that in America we have constitutional limitations that don't permit that, right? And so most people don't realize this, but in America, in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, there is a list of items that the federal government is responsible for, a list of items that the legislature can tax for, right? And if it's not on that list, the 10th Amendment of the United States expressly forbids the federal government from managing those items, right? So a classic one is healthcare. Healthcare is not on that list, which means the 10th Amendment says expressly that the federal government can't tax for it, can't manage it, can't pass laws for it, right? So now that doesn't mean that government can't do it at all. The state government could do it, but that's what the 10th Amendment says. It says if it isn't a power given explicitly to the federal government, then it reverts to the state governments or the people, right? So if you are one of those people, Grooven, for example, wants to just collect a whole bunch of money at the federal level and then redistribute everything to make it a level playing field, you can't, right? The federal government the U.S. Constitution expressly forbids that. Now, should it happen in the abstract? I also don't think the answer is yes to that question either. And here's why. If you look at the list in Article 1, Section 8, all of the items on the list that the federal government is supposed to do are what's called non-rivalrous, non-excludable commodities, right? So in other words, they're things that everyone can use, like, for example, the United States military. Everyone can use the national defense. And they're things that don't run out when you use them. Again, like the United States military, because the United States military can go fight somewhere and they're still there. They still can go fight somewhere else, right? So every single one of those things is an item that doesn't run out and everyone can use it equally, right? Now, if you take something like healthcare, the reason that doesn't fit on the list is because if you go fill up 200 hospital beds, well, you've utilized part of the hospital access. So that you do use it up, right? Medical supplies are things you use up. Pharmaceuticals are things you use up. And not everybody would be using it evenly either. Someone like me, who's middle-aged, in relatively good shape, takes care of myself, doesn't smoke, goes out and works out, I'm not going to be using health at anywhere near the rate of, for example, my mother, who's very old and smokes and is not, does not do physical activity and things like that, or some guy who's like 400 pounds and, has diabetes. These things are, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having different levels of health, but there's no way that they're going to use the same amount of healthcare as I am. So that it makes it fundamentally unfair to me, right? Why should I have to pay for a dude that smokes 7 cartons of cigarettes a week, right? That just doesn't make sense. So now, right. So Kristen, like I'm saying, this welfare stuff, it unfortunately, the government is not technically allowed to do it. So a lot of the things that have slid through, things that we already do have on the books, like Social Security, like, Medicaid, Medicare, technically they are unconstitutional, right? Now they slipped through because FDR came in at a really good time when he had the courts basically hogtied. And nobody's really challenged it since then. But yeah, I encourage you guys to look deeper into the 10th Amendment because it's my favorite amendment. It's probably the most neglected amendment in the Bill of Rights. People just kind of like if I talk about the 10th Amendment in front of progressives, in front of left-leaning people, most of them are like, huh? What's the they have to go look it up, right? Because they just don't think about it. They just don't use it. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to explain that. But yeah, ultimately, the truth is that even if you were to magically wave the magic wand and give every single person exactly the same amount of money and give every single person exactly the same amount of income each year, they still wouldn't be equal. Some people would very quickly outcompete others. Some people would very quickly use their other advantages that some people don't have. For example, if you are making exactly the same money as me and have the exact same money as me, the same assets, but you're smarter or stronger or better looking or taller, you are just going to outcompete me. That's just how it is, right? Those advantages, there's going to be so many advantages that the government can never equalize, right? So trying to equalize each and every advantage, each and every item for every person is just a futile effort. Now, to Tanya's point, basic human needs, when you say things like basic human needs should be free around the world, then I would ask you, why do we have money at all? Right? Why do we even have an economy? Because the whole reason that economies have developed was to distribute basic human needs. Now, and you could take that to the next, you could take that as far as you want to. And like I could say, so for example, you could call it you could say food is a basic need and that everyone should have food for free. You could say that health, I don't know that healthcare is generally speaking a basic need, but even if you count it as a basic need, how far do you go with that? Like, do you make each and every drug a basic need and that everybody should have access to all drugs at all times? This is a dangerous game. And the biggest problem is I have no problem with people having these needs. I have no problem with these needs being fulfilled. I do have a problem with taking money from a one person to give it to another. That's my problem, right? So one of the problems is in the United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence, we all have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and legally that's the pursuit of property, right? Property rights are really big in America. You can't just take property from one person to give it to another. That's the biggest problem, right? If you do, that's called theft, right? If it's not in the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 again, that's one of the items. Those are the items that we are contractually bound to agree to having our money redistributed for, right? That's our social contract with the United States. If it's not in that, then it has to be either the state government or it has to be, look, the best person to do to redistribute these basic needs would be charities, right? Charities manage over $500 billion a year worth of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. That's more than enough to feed every single person in America, right? They have to do it cheaply, but it's more than enough, right? So these basic human needs can be met without the federal government stealing one person's wealth to give it to another. And again, like I said, this is it. In a perfect world, would I love that everybody has everything? Yeah, I love that this was like Star Trek world, and we all had these like replicators that you could just go over and be like, I would like a pepperoni pizza, and it's boop, and it just appears. I would love that. I would love, you be able to go have these like Star Wars medical tricorders, just wave this wand in front of somebody and their broken knee is fixed. I'd love that too. But until we get there, I think we're going to have to deal with what we've got for right now. Now, I will say, Tanya knows that one of my biggest fears is AI. I will say that AI, before they take over the world, they'll probably create like an age of abundance. It'll be like a situation where AI basically does everything for us, where robots manage the entire world. And when that happens, okay, great. That'll be fun. But until of course they realize that they don't need us anymore for all that, and they're just wasting resources on us. But anyway, guys, you've been awesome. Please, again, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much, Itano, for your super chat. We really appreciate it. Every support. And I'll catch you guys next time on Common Mansplaining.